Right, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Those who don't know me, my name is Afani. I'm a senior DevOps consultant, been in this zone for over a decade. So if you landed here for the first time, welcome to my channel. I'll be continuing doing more videos in cloud foundations, not only in AWS, but also planning to do in Azure and Google. So if you'd like to learn along with me, please subscribe and share your feedback in the comment section. Also, please stay with me till the end of this video so that I'll share free downloadable code samples for this session. All right, welcome back to another session of AWS Lambda functions. So today we'll be doing a deep dive into AWS Lambda functions by taking a fun example and show you how we can get CloudWatch logs locally in your desktop and not toggling between AWS console and your core editor. So the reason why I said fun example here, because you know that in a very recent scenario between Willsmith and Chris Rock during the Oscars, looking for a light version of this video and pre-install steps, I put that version video in the description box. So please feel free to complete that and come back to this session. All right, here is the high-level design document. Pretty simple. I have an EC2 instance sitting in US East 1. And I have an event rule that was written, which is basically spying on this EC2 instance to see if this EC2 instance is shut down or terminated. Then that event will be recorded by event rule and then trigger a Lambda function. So the fun fact here is the Lambda function, after it triggers, all it is doing is calling a Twitter API and getting a feed for all the hashtags with Willsmith Oscars. I hope you got the clear understanding of high-level design. Let's jump into coding. Here are the high-level steps for implementing this high-level design. Basically, we need to have like few prerequisites. One is install and configuring AWS CLI. The previous video, which I posted in the description box, you should be able to get more details on it. And also installing Docker. And finally, installing Cdk. The first thing that I'm doing is I want to create a Lambda function that basically calls my Twitter account, right? So for that, I'm creating a basic directory. Okay. And then cd. After that, I create a folder called resources. And under that, I create another folder called Lambda. Okay. So this folder is going to be our source for our Lambda function. Okay. So let's create one simple file called Willsmith lambda.py. Okay, and then open that. Okay, it's empty file right now. So the first thing that we'll do is we will import, obviously, boto3, which is our Python library for AWS, and then we'll import a Twitter's API called twipy. Okay, so this is one which is responsible for calling all the API calls for the Twitter. Okay, so since I already have a developer account for Twitter, that's the reason I'm just directly jumping in using it. But a prerequisite step for using a Twitter API, if you search for Google or if you search for YouTube videos, you will find for how to open a developer account or developer API account for Twitter. You should get a lot of videos, but I'll put that in the description so that you don't even need to worry about finding different videos. Okay, so here I'm importing the twipy as in my library for the Twitter, and then I'm creating a variable called Twitter bear and token. This is a token that usually Twitter gives you once you create an an app for the API call. So for now, I'm just keeping it empty, but I'll feed that information a little later. And then I'll also wanted to put a hashtag here, hashtag query, which I am planning to put it as a. For now, I'll just let's put it as in hash Willsmith Oscars. Okay, so this is my hashtag I want to query. And then, so now I'm going to call my Twitter API client, which is 3pi.client. Don't worry about remembering all this stuff. I'm going to give you a sample code so that you don't have to worry about it. Okay. Calling that. After that, I am just, querying tweets. So let's assign tweets to client dot search. There is a list of stuff that you can do, but for now I'm just putting recent tweets, but you can do all tweets as well. So I'm just putting recent tweets so that our query would be limited. Okay, and here all I'm doing is query is hashtag query. All right, this is how it looks like. So there are a lot of features. I'm going to put the documentation of Twitter, but like I said, the goal is not about learning how to do a Twitter API, but the goal is to how we can use this as an example to call to build the Lambda functions, right? So with this, we're done with basic Twitter API calls. Now we're going to define our Lambda function with a simple event context. Okay. After that, I go here. I'm just giving a as an empty array so that I could print this information down the line. So I'm putting try for tweet in tweets.data. Okay, and print tweet.text. Okay, and once this is done, so I want to append this data to A so that I could return that information to CloudWatch logs. Tweet.text here. After that, I'm gonna put an exception. Except 3pi errors dot 3pi exception as E. Okay, just print E just to get in if there's any errors. And then ultimately what we are doing is we are returning A. That's all. Right? So just a quick go through what I did is I require to have an Twitter bearer token ID, which is a secret token ID that Twitter gives you once you create a developer API account. And then I am basically querying a hashtag Willsmith Oscars here. And I'm calling the 3pi client here. And this is my authentication, which it is authenticates. And really here, it's basically searching this particular API. I'm calling out search recent tweets API with the hashtag of this particular query. Okay. And all I am doing here is event context. That's all. Okay. And I'm looping that particular results and then appending that information back to A, which is my list, and then printing out that list here. That's all. All right. So let me pause this video and then configure my AWS console authentication, and then I'm going to run this video and see how my Lambda function is going to react to it. Okay. Okay, I have configured AWS CLI. I just want to test very quickly. AWS STS get caller identity. I'm able to configure it. Now I need a bunch of files, which basically runs my Docker stuff, right? For doing that, I'm going to create a Docker file under the same Lambda folder. Okay, and then I'm going to open that folder file now. So this is an empty file again. So what I'm going to do is I am going to write this one basically with public.ecr.aws/lambda/python. Since I'm writing the code in Python, I'm basically calling out this one for building my Docker image, and then copy my source code, which is basically Willsmith.lambda Python. Copy this into Lambda task root. Okay. I just noticed that I need to rename this file so that it matches the one that I'm seeing here. All right, so let me add this file folder to the workspace so that I could add this one. And if I go here, okay. All right, so this is my Docker file, which is pretty much simple, Willsmith lambda.py. However, if you noticed, my Lambda function also has something called py, right? So I also make sure my Docker also have that functionality in it. In order to do that, what we need to do is pretty much simple. All we need to do is create a folder called requirements.txt, and then put tw3py. You can put as many packages as it is required, but since I'm just calling out only one here, which is 3py, you just need that one piece, right? So I'm just putting it here, and after that, go back to my Docker file. And what I'm doing with the Docker file is I'm also referring to copy that requirements file, okay? Requirements.txt file to my Lambda task root. Okay, so this is done. So once it is copied, basically copying the requirements to Lambda doesn't really help. It has to install, right? For installing it, we need to run pip3. Since I am using pip3, so that's the reason I'm doing it. But if you have a different pip version in your desktop, so feel free to add that. So pip install no cache directory, and requirements is basically requirements.txt. So all I'm doing is referring to that particular file and asking pip to install it. That's all. Okay. So with that being said, so once we're done with the copying it, and then the final is we need a command execution of this particular file. So this one is pretty much simple. All we need to do is call out our Python script here, which is basically Willsmith -lambda dot lambda handler, lambda_handler. So if you see here, right? So basically this lambda handler, I'm just calling out, this is my main function of the Python script. All I'm asking my Docker file is run this one, okay, from this file. So Willsmith -lambda dot lambda handler. If you have a different function name, you can refer that one here. So with that being said, my Docker file is ready. Before we execute that, I just want to create a simple a Docker test script, a shell script that will basically execute my AWS access, my AWS STS coordinate. Okay, so if you followed my previous video, probably you might have already known it. But since this is your first time, don't worry about it. We're going to create one here. So for that, I'm going to do is touch docker-test.sh. You see here is an empty file. This is an empty shell script calling out bin bash, and then sts get caller identity, just calling out this command, and after that I'm going to do a docker build with the root, and the tag is Willsmith Lambda. Basically my file name, my Python script file name. So I'm just giving a simple, a basic version number to it. Okay, and then finally run my Docker with the Docker run commands. And if you see here, I'm referring this to local port 9000 and then environments. I'm just calling it out as access keys. Access key ID equals to AWS access key ID. So if you configure AWS CLI, you should be able to get this without any issues. If you did not configure AWS CLI, this will not work. Secret access key equals to AWS secret access key. Okay, and do the same thing here. AWS region equals to AWS region. That's all. And then finally, you need to refer your tag. My tag here is Willsmith Lambda. Right? And then this one. That's all. Okay, just a quick view of what we did with this file is basically we created a sample shell script that runs a bunch of Docker files for us. The first one is Docker build, which is building this particular whole package, Python Lambda function. And then we're running that Lambda function locally with also configuring our AWS configuration here. Okay, so let me split this window so that we will see we need two commands. I'll show you what are those. Okay, so before we execute this Docker test script, just wanted to make sure if Docker is up and running. So I see that Docker desktop is running here. Then now go to and execute this particular Docker test file that we just wrote. Okay, it just built my Docker image. Now all I need to do is run the curl command for my local Docker. For that, I think I used it before, so I'm just going to retype this one. So this is my curl URL, which could be the same thing for you. I'm going to put this URL in the README document so that you don't have to remember this one. All we need to do is just execute this one. Okay, so if you see here, this is the list of tweets that we got based on whatever we are searching for. This is Willsmith Oscars. So based on this hashtag, we got this output right in your desktop. We didn't even went to the AWS console. Okay, so we have successfully validated our Lambda function, right, with the Twitter API calls. Now the next step is to create a TypeScript project for provisioning the infrastructure in AWS using Cdk. There you go. So this one is basically, this is what we are planning to do now. So we have completed this part, the Lambda function part. Now we need to configure or provision this whole infrastructure in AWS. All right, let's go back to our terminal again and start coding it. So for doing that, if you see here, remember in the previous session, we created a resources folder here called resources. And under that, we have a Lambda folder, right? So this is our Lambda folder. So let's come back one step back, so that we create another folder called infra. Okay, and then go to infra. Again, make sure you have a CDK installed in your editor. Otherwise, the next session, the whole video won't work for you. Okay, so I kind of going to create all right, so I am creating a CDK project. For that, I have a command called cdk init app language equals to TypeScript. So if you're comfortable with Python, please feel free to go ahead with doing it. CDK supports Python, TypeScript, JavaScript, and other language, Java also. So since I'm comfortable with TypeScript, I'm going with TypeScript. So CDK init app language equals to TypeScript. So what it does is it's going to create this whole stuff for you. So it looks like I kind of gave a wrong type, script. Oh, sorry. So the uppercase, the lowercase. So this will basically install a bunch of libraries related to CDK. And there are a few configurations which are helpful to replace once that is done. So I'm going to show you that. But for now, let's wait until this is complete. All right. So CDK has created a format, a blueprint for us to get started. Okay. So if you want to know details about all these files, there are tons of videos and documentation. I'm going to put that, if you go to the CDK documentation, you will know more details about it. Okay. So for now, what I'm going to do is minimize this one and go to library folder and bin folder. So since I want to configure or I want to create this project so that anybody could change this whole thing using a simple parameters. For that, what I'm doing is I'm creating a new folder under infra called config. Okay, imagine this is like your parameter file. Okay, so under that I'm creating config.json. Okay, so this is my JSON file, which is basically adding a bunch of configurations to it. All I'm doing here is imagine that if you have an if you're creating this one for your company or your personal purpose, it will be very useful for you to change it with very quick configurations. So for now, I'm just putting org name as Amazon, AMZN, okay, and then app name. I'm gonna put something like Willsmith Lambda, okay. And then just to differentiate between, if there are multiple versions of the same application, so I'm just putting an attribute here with call it as 01, okay, and then environment type as dev, okay. To that, I'm gonna calling out where do you want me to provision this infrastructure. So for that, I'm using this parameter, and for now, I'm just doing it in US East 1. Okay. All right. So my config file is done. Now I need to call this config file into my library file, and sorry, into my bin infra.ts file. So for that, what I'll do is I'll just call out here import star as config from config.json. Okay, this is pretty much simple, right? All right, so it won't resolve it for the first time. So that's the reason I was mentioning about there are a few changes that might be required for you to do in your ts.config. So if you see here, right, I included here, but it's still showing as it can't find that file because I don't have this particular configuration sitting in my TypeScript configuration file. So here, what I'm going to do is just add this one here with configuration module as true. So with this, I think it should resolve. There you go. Now I don't see this error, right? All right, so let's go back to our infra.ts file. So this is our infra.ts file, right? And where we are calling a bunch of stuff here. So one is we're calling our CDK library, and then we are including our infra stack as our infra library, and then our configurations here, right? So for doing that, I haven't, instead of doing this asterisk here, I just want to call a specific API here, which is basically app, okay, from So this will help us to remove this additional tags here. So AWS Cdk, new app, new app. Now what we need to do is we need to also include the environment. For doing that, so I have a constant environment variable which I am calling out with a simple account process dot environment dot cdk account and region colon. So instead of calling out process.environment.cdk default region, what we are doing is, since our region is coming from config dot region. Okay. After that, let's create another one called stack name so that we could use that variable while executing this code. So here, what we are doing here is, remember those stuff that I put here: config, org name, app name, attribute, environment type, and region. We're going to include all this combination to create a stack name for our stack. So if I had to put this one, means config dot org name hyphen config dot app name, and then what we could do is we can just put a static name called intra hyphen stack with again another attribute called config dot environment type, then another attribute called so this stuff is not a mandatory, but since we are doing it with the right way, it's always good to have an easily readable stack name so that we could see, and it will help us also to delete it down the line, right? All right, so we are done with the stack name. Okay, and then what we are doing here is we create a constant stack equals to new infra stack, and instead of creating this static variable, I'm just going to delete this and add a general one called stack name. Okay, that's it. All right, so we have stuff here, and this is all the default comment section where it comes when you're creating it for the first time. You can get rid of it, and then we can continue making changes. So only thing is we need to pass this information back to our infra stack. So for passing this information, we need to do, this is what we have to do. So first thing is we're calling our environments loading from the environment variable, and then whatever you are defining in the config.json, we're going to include that. So which is basically org name coming from config dot org name, and then we're going to use this information to create a resources with the specific name to it. That's the reason we are including this information. Config dot app name, okay, and attribute colon config dot attribute, okay, and then environment type equals to config dot environment type, and then finally region, okay, region config dot region, and ignore these red lines for now, because since this particular file in lib folder doesn't have these attributes, that's the reason it is complaining about it. But once we add these stuff into infra stack, then it should be good. All right, I think we are almost ready with our bin infra.ts file. Only thing that we need to add here is additional console log, and then we're done with the stuff. So here app.synth is the last step that we need to do. Okay, we're done here. Now we move to InfoStack. All right, let me minimize this and let me add this one here so that we could see these two files side by side. Okay. All right, so we need a bunch of resources. Remember the stuff that we are doing here. Let me pull that readme file again. So we need to create we are creating a VPC, we are creating an EC2 instance, we are creating an event rule, and also we are creating a Lambda function. So we need to create all these resources in our infra file. So for that, here, if you come here, infrastack.ts. So let's import all those Cdk libraries from there. Here. So import star from Lambda from AWS Cdk / AWS lib folder Lambda. Okay, and then we also need to add a few more things here. We have stack properties, and also we need a duration to define our Lambda, what is the timeout for that, and also physical name for our instance. All right, this is done. Now the second thing is we need to call out for the events, right? So for that, import star as events from, again, AWS Lambda, AWS Cdk and AWS events. Okay, this is done, and continue doing the same thing for event targets, because we also need to include those stuff for where do you want me to trigger the Lambda, where do you want me to trigger these events. So in this case, we are triggering the Lambda, right? So targets from AWS. So there's a typo here. It's not popping up. All right, so this is import AWS Cdk lib and then AWS events targets. Okay, to that import. We also need to import the role and policy statement and principles and management policies from IAM roles. So I have a library that I copied for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy those two stuff from Cdk documentation. So this is what it looks like. So import role, policy statement, policy service principle, and also managed principle, and do the same thing from the EC2. Okay, so since we are ready now, so first thing is we need to extend our properties. So in Cdk, there is something called export interface infrastack properties. Infrastack props extends our stack properties. Okay, so this one do that. So remember all these stuff that we are adding here. So now it's time for us to basically include them here. So which means org name is type string. So as soon as we add these things, all the red marks will go away sooner. And then is string attribute is also a string. Environment type is also a string. And then finally region a string. All right. So we have an org name, we have a stack properties, and now what we need to do is we have to include them here. So instead of calling them as in properties here, we know exactly what it is. So that's the reason we're going to remove it and then put it here. See, the red mark gone now, right? Because we are extending those things. All right, just like how there's a default comment section here, I'm going to remove them. Now it's time for adding a few changes to it. The first one is create a variable again, same thing. Name equals to props dot name to lowercase. Okay. All right. So I'm going to copy all this stuff a bunch of times, and then I'm going to rename the variables. Okay. Okay. So here our name, name, attribute, okay. So we have region also here. All right. So once this is done, now it's time for creating a general name so that we could use it for attaching it to the resources. You'll know more about it why I'm doing it. So once I create this general, and here all I'm doing is, remember the stack name that we used here? So we're going to use the same whole thing, except for the fact we don't need an here. So we just need org name, app name, environment type, and attribute. Okay. So also here we don't need a stack here because we're creating a resource, right? That's the reason we're just using it. All right. So we have this now, right? And then we don't need this. All right. We have set up our variables pretty much everything. Now it's time for creating the roles. So first thing is we need to create an instance. For creating an instance, we need to create an VPC, right? So for doing that VPC, all we need to do is, it's there in the Cdk documentation. So I'm just putting it. So VPC equals to new VPC. But this one does as here. If you see, what I'm doing is VPC, and here I'm calling it as a general, so that our resource name would look this whole thing plus VPC. I hope now you understand the value why I created that variable. Okay. Now VPC requires a CIDR range. And for now, I'm just calling out 192.168.0.0/16. Okay, you can shrink it down to whatever the size. I'm just keeping it simple for now. Max AZ also is required by you're creating your VPC, which is 1 here. And don't worry about the red lines. So you'll get to complete those things once you're done with your syntax fixing. All right, so now we're done with the subnet. So we need to add a subnet configuration to it. Subnet configuration is, we need to have two subnets. One is the private subnet and the other one is the public subnet. Right? That's the basic ones. So for that, what I'm doing is name. Again, I'm adding my general variable. Okay. Public subnet. Okay, and here my subnet type is, of course, it's a public, so subnet type dot public. Okay, and then my CIDR mask. CIDR mask is 24. So now I'm just keeping it for 34. So do the same thing for the private as well. So for here, I'm going to put this one as a private subnet. and here it's a private with NAT. So when I put private with NAT, it will basically use this public subnet to add that NAT configuration. Okay. All right. I think we are done with the VPC. Now we need to focus on the EC2. Right. So for creating an EC2, we need to have an EC2 role. Right. So for having the EC2 role, I'm creating a EC2 instance role. Never mind. I think we can use it. We can use the default. Cdk will create one for us. So let's just continue using without creating a separate role for that. Okay. Constant EC2 instance equals to new EC2 instance this. Again, I'm using this one as general. Right. Then instance. Okay, so here I'm going to use this one as general. All right, so let's close this one for now as we don't need it. Okay, now we're going to include this where I'm creating this instance is VPC, which I created before here. This guy. Right, and after that, I have an instance type, which is basically instance type dot of. Oops. All right, instance class dot t3 and instance size is dot micro. Okay, so I'm just creating a very basic one with the t3 and micro. All right, now I need a machine image. I'm going to use it as a machine image, the default Linux one. Okay, latest Amazon Linux one. Okay, so where do you want me to create this EC2 instance? That is where you configure it here. It's basically telling you to create the subnets under subnet, private subnet, which is basically vpc.private subnets. There we go. I think we are done with the EC2 instance. Okay, so if you want to log into this EC2 instance, you need to add an additional role, and that additional role is basically we are adding it to see the wonder here. So basically, I didn't create any role separately, but instead I'm calling the role that is already going to create with CDK. So I'm calling that particular role here and adding a managed policy, and that managed policy is AWS managed policy name is this guy. It is a managed to instance code. All right, I think we are done with this one for now with the EC2 instance. Okay, now let's create an event rules or the Lambda. Let's do the Lambda and then go to the event rule. Okay, so for doing that, I need a Lambda rule because Lambda rule requires a special access to trigger something, right? So for that, I need to create a constant Lambda role equals to new role. General. Okay, and then here create an additional Lambda role. Okay, and after that, we will basically include everything here, saying that whom do you want to assume by? You want to assume by new service principal on service principal is basically Lambda dot Amazon AWS.com. Okay, all right, now here it is done, and then path is service role. Okay, so we have created a simple Lambda role, which we're going to add a bunch of access to this. Okay, for now, let's continue creating a Lambda function. Okay, so then it's going to be the same Lambda function, new Lambda, and here I'm going to use a Docker image for Lambda function, Docker image function. This. So Lambda function. Again, I'm going to add general here, the Lambda function to add. Okay, so here the timeout duration is required for this. So basically, and also we need to know where is our code. Remember, we created a code folder. We created a folder called resources/lambda at the beginning of the session. So now we're going to call that one here, lambda dot docker image code from image asset is dot okay, so we're gonna include our resource folder here, which is basically we are calling out resources lambda. That's all. I think we need that. Okay. All right. So this one basically covers that of having that lambda function to be calling out for the resources. Then we're going to use a timeout. So timeout here is basically duration of seconds as just put 20 seconds for now. Okay. Then move on to environment. So remember, when we are writing our lambda function, let me open that one here. So when we are writing our lambda function, we gave this one as an hard-coded value, right? So we want to pass these two information to the lambda function from our as an environment variables. So for doing that here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called Twitter mirror token. Here I'm going to hard code that value. Okay. In fact, you can even configure this whole thing from the config.json which you wrote it. But for now, I'll just go with this one. So we have a hashtag underscore query. So my hashtag query, which I am going to pass to my lambda function, is hash Willsmith Oscars. Okay. Oh, looks like I forgot to put a comma here. There you go. I think we are good with the basic lambda function. Now, there are a bunch of stuff for the lambda role that I need to add, which are basically to create the logs, right? So for doing the logs, I kind of copied that information to save some time. So here is my add policy to these logs. So basically I'm creating a log group, log stream, and put log events. Okay, this is exactly what I'm doing. And after doing this, now it's time for creating the event rule. Okay, so the last step is to create an event rule. So the event rule looks pretty much similar to what we've been doing for the EC2 instance. Right? Basically, new events. Oops. New events dot rule. Is instance state rule. Instance state rule. Okay. So here again, I'm gonna put a general here so that it's easy to remember. All right. So it's very important. What is the event pattern that it has to watch out for, right? So the event pattern here is basically my source is AWS.EC2. Okay. After that, detail type. This is a common one. You could read the documentation for more, but I'm just copy pasting it so that we don't miss it. Okay. And then detail. What is the detail? What exactly is the detail here is where I remember I was telling you to watch out for termination or stopping or shutting down, right? So this is where that whole thing goes here. So the state here is, you could read the documentation for event rules, then you would get more information about it. Okay. So this stopping and also shutting down. So it will watch for these two API calls or events to be happen at EC2 instance, and then the event rule will get activated and triggers the respective Lambda function. All right, now we have event details, but whom to target? What is the target? The target here is new targets. Remember, I imported this event. So here I could use Lambda function, and here is my Lambda function. All right. So I think we are pretty much done with writing a code. So it's time for validating the changes. So before we validate the changes, let me quickly go through what exactly we did here. Okay. So we brought all these information from our config.json, and we used it every resource that we created with the general here. And then we created a VPC. We created an instance and created the user instance in the private subnet. After that, we added an SSM session manager so that we would be using that in case if you want to log into the EC2 instance. But for this purpose, we don't really need it. Okay, so next is we have a Lambda role. The Lambda role requires some bunch of creating the log files and all that stuff. That's the reason we created a Lambda role. Remember the difference. We didn't create any role for the instance here, but we created a role for the Lambda. Okay, and here the Lambda function is pretty straightforward. We are calling it from the Docker image function, and where is that Lambda function? So it is sitting somewhere in the resources Lambda folder, right? And we're passing a bunch of two environment variables here: Twitter bearer token and hashtag query. All right, so we added the policy, we added a few permissions to the Lambda role, and all this stuff goes here. And finally, we created a rule. The rule is basically to have the source is aws.ec2, and then state is stopping and shutting down, and the targets are basically Lambda function. Okay, so before we trigger it, I just want to add these two to our, instead of having this, what I will do is, let me commit this section. Adding here, and don't worry about it, we're going to fix it. Okay. However, we need to import from the environment, right? So for importing from the environment, what we need to do is there is something called os.environment. So I'll show you how does it looks like. Basically, os.environment, and all we are doing is we're calling this guy. And do the same thing, os.environment and quotes hashtag query, right? And since it is not recognizable, so we need to import the os also. Here, import os. There you go. All right, I think we are in a good shape now. So I'm gonna update my AWS CLI credentials and come back, and then we're going to do the CDK deploy. Okay. All right. So let's start with creating and resources CDK deploy. So you have to go to the infra folder and do CDK deploy, and this will basically create a bunch of AWS resources. So before it does it, it will ask you to review these changes, and if you're okay, just click S, and then it will take some time to create the CloudFormation stack. So the good thing with the CDK is it'll print out all the events that it does when it's creating the CloudFormation template. You would exactly see the same things when you're going through AWS console. Okay, so we have executed the CDK deploy command, and that basically created a bunch of resources. And if you see here, let me scroll down slowly. You should be able to see it has created an IAM roles, EIPs, and then subnets, VPCs, and all the stuff that is required for us to provision the infrastructure. So let me show you how does it looks like from the browser itself. We have provisioned our infrastructure. I went to EC2 instances to see how does my instance looks like. So this is how my instance is. So all I'm trying to do here is stop this instance and see if my event rule triggers and trigger the Lambda function. So I stopped my instance, and then I'm going to CloudWatch logs. I'm clicking the latest CloudWatch log, and if you see here, you see this one, right? So basically, it has got all the tweets that were the recent tweets with the tags that are with Willsmith Oscars, right? Willsmith Oscars. So it means that our validation, whatever we were planning to do, is basically executed. Let me quickly review what exactly we did so far. Okay, so this is our design document. So after we provisioned the infrastructure, we terminated instance, and we shut down the instance, and that shutdown created an event rule activation, and that event rule triggered this particular Lambda function. So whatever the logic of this Lambda function has been executed. So in this case, the logic is fetch the results from Twitter with hashtag Willsmith Oscars. If you like my videos, please share and subscribe, and don't forget to put a feedback in the comment so that I could learn from it. Bye for now and happy coding.